Right, it's 11 o'clock on the dot. A very warm welcome to our Women in Sectional title webinar. Hello, everyone. And it's great to have you back. Thank you so much for supporting us. Thank you so much to our sponsors, to Zfin, We Connect You, Sectional Title Solutions, and PKF Octagon for allowing us to have this platform upon which to learn and share and grow as women. I'm really, really happy to announce that we will have a new sponsor on as well from next month. So that will be very good. Today, our format is slightly different. We have pre-recorded an interview with my guest, and that's because she sits in Sydney. So they're 9 hours odd ahead of us, and I think that's where it would be 8 p.m. tonight. So it would be a bit unfair to interview her at that stage. So we thought we'd take the stress out of it and just pre-record the video. So let me introduce the guest because we had a nice full interview with her. Her name is Angelique Mentis. She is a non-practicing lawyer, innovative and forward-thinking leader in the parking industry. Angelique is the founder and CEO of thatsmyspot and Parking Spotz, two companies she established 15 years ago to offer solutions to the frustration she personally experienced as a resident in an apartment building with unauthorized drivers parking in her parking bays. Recently, she's expanded her automated parking solutions to address challenges with electric vehicle charging in parking bays. Angelique also serves as the president of Parking Australia, where she focuses on driving positive change in urban mobility, transport infrastructure, and EV charging to promote electric vehicle adoption and sustainable transport outcomes. Through her leadership and initiatives, she's helping the future of parking in Australia, driving positive change in sustainable urban mobility and transport infrastructure. So we're going to ask our technicians in the background to put the video on now so that we can watch it and see exactly what was said. But it was really interesting. Thank you, and I'll join you later. Hello, and a very, very warm welcome to you, Angelique Mentis. It's fantastic to have you on board all the way from Sydney.
Thank you so much, Marina. It's delightful to be here, and I'm glad we got our time zones coordinated, which is wonderful.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a real privilege to speak to you today. And I must say, I've been reading up all about you, and it's so heartening to find women driving certain industries so hard. Maybe if you could start off just by telling us a little bit about yourself and about your work in the two businesses that you so successfully run.
Okay, well, I didn't start my life in parking. I started my life just like you, Marina, as a lawyer. I was in corporate finance, and I worked in New York for nearly 20 years on and off. I ran a law firm here, but as I had young children and I lived in an apartment building, and in Australia we call that strata apartments, whereas you call them sectional title in South Africa, I found even though we had security swipes in the building and 3 to get in the building, people would tailgate, and because I had priority parking directly opposite the lift, they'd try to park in my parking spot. I had 3 kids, needed to get them out of the car. I was busy, and it was very, very frustrating. So back then, all you could do was go to the building, get approval, put a garage door in, go to council, and it cost a lot of money, and it took a lot of time. So the next building that I was in was a mixed-use commercial and residential apartment. I had an office suite in there. Similarly, owned parking in the building, but it also accommodated a hotel complex. So we found that there were a lot of residents and guests from the hotel who would come and park in our parking spot. And of course, again, the same thing, but here we couldn't enclose the garage. So it was exposed, and all you could do was put a bollard in. Well, putting a bollard in that's a manual bollard means you have to get in and out of the vehicle. It's dangerous, it's cumbersome, and it wasn't very efficient, especially when you've got young kids in the car. So I set upon myself, as I incurred this problem myself, to go and solve that and find something on an automated basis that would make it simple and easy to be able to physically reserve my parking spot, and then to be able to sail in and with an automated mechanism to lower that and drive into my spot. And then when I was gone, to reserve it for me. So that's how I started my first parking business, out of personal need. And I know there's a lot of people in apartment buildings that still suffer from this problem. And so that's how we started our first business, That's My Spot. So it's a long story now, over the years
No,
as
no,
that's
carry on.
grown, as the clients became larger and became bigger buildings, it was great. So we moved from remote controls on bollards to smartphone operated bollards, which is even better because then you can share with multiple people without having to hand out a physical device like a remote control. And so then as my clients became even larger, so it became large residential apartment buildings that had significant visitor parking, or some shopping centres as well. They wanted to take out a little bit of the friction with and enable automation of the whole booking process, like a parking app, but then having a physical bollard at the end of it, which physically protects and secures the parking bay. And so that's what we've been building for the last little while under the radar at Parking Spotz, and we're just about to launch those shortly. So that will have much more far wide-ranging applications. It will automate the entire process. It integrates into building management platforms. So it eliminates a whole lot of friction from both the user and also from the building manager or the facilities manager, or if they're not there. And especially now with electric vehicles coming into play, being able to physically secure and ensure that those EV charging bays are used for EV charging only by authorised drivers. So that's how my parking journey evolved. And along the way, somehow I was picked up by the board of Parking Australia, and where I'm now also president, which is part of my volunteering capacity.
That's fantastic. Absolutely. You need to come through to South Africa. We need to have a chat because, yeah, there are often people in parking bays here who shouldn't be. And I know that there was talk, I know I was reading something in Australia that strata managers spend 15 to 18% of their time dealing with parking issues. Would
That's
you agree with
correct.
that?
I personally have interviewed about 85 building and strata managers of residential apartment buildings. And when they work out how much time they waste, it's probably around 15% plus. But on top of that, it's the stress, it's the frustration. I mean, you're living in sectional title in a community environment. The last thing you want when you come out to park in your spot or use visitor bays is to have an argument with somebody that lives in your community. And so it's really important to take that element out of it, because the stress and frustration, it's an intangible pain point, but and people get very emotional about parking. It's a very emotive issue. It triggers people a lot.
And in South Africa, we used to have a rule in our default conduct rules where you could tow away the body corporate. They could tow away a vehicle, but now they've taken that out. So I think all the towing companies weren't prepared to actually take the risk of towing vehicles. So yeah, we're going to have to go your route. So
well, in Australia, similarly, the towing has been restricted because it's on private property, and you have to deal with rules on abandoned vehicles and abandoned property, and it's very strict in terms of how you can move it. But even logistically, if you think about it, most apartment buildings have parking underground. So if you've got to get a tow truck down there, those height restrictions, they're much lower. So if they've got to winch and lift a vehicle off the ground and then tow it up, it's going to have to be taller than the height of the parking basement. So a lot of the tow truck companies won't go down there. And when they have, we've seen things like burst water pipes above or the sprinklers. So it can damage the assets unintentionally. And that's an expensive last resort.
Australia now seems to be embracing a greener future with the sort of onslaught of electric vehicles, and you call them EV. I've read a couple of your articles, which have been very, very interesting. And South Africa, we are way behind, I have to tell you, in that respect.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we are, I would say, probably 7-8 years behind on the EV vehicles. If you look at it for the listeners, 0.02% of all vehicles manufactured in South Africa are electric at the moment. And I think COVID played a huge role in sort of pulling us back. We've got 350 allocated charging stations, in South Africa. So obviously, we need to be at the forefront going forward. So that's why I wanted to chat to you today. And a lot of the time, well, this whole thing was sparked by a visit to Sydney, and in fact, a visit to Barangaroo harbour area, where Francesco Andrioni was showing me the electric chargers, and I thought, gosh, this is so exciting. So when I saw your article, I thought we have to talk about this. And maybe we can start, Angelique, by talking or looking at new buildings. Say, for example, you've got a new development. What is the current situation in, I suppose it would be New South Wales at this stage?
Okay. So Australia's been really good like that. We have the Electric Vehicle Council, and at Parking Australia, we work closely with them. The Electric Vehicle Council has recently, the National Construction Code in Australia has now been changed as of October last year, and every new residential strata building must be provisioned to have an EV charger in every single parking bay in that building. That's for all new builds going forward. So any new DA, it's not saying put a charger in each bay, but there needs to be the infrastructure to do it. Typically, that involves things like a metered circuit board, so you can allocate cost to each lot or each bay that is allocated to that particular individual, because you don't want a situation where people who have petrol vehicles are paying for the electricity of the other person's charger. I mean, they're not going to pay for our petrol, right? So why should we pay for their electricity? So putting a metered circuit board in and wiring for capacity to connect a charger is far less expensive at the development stage with a new build. So that came in October last year, and that's now a requirement for any new strata building across Australia.
Gosh,
so that's a big development.
Interesting.
So that is a big change. I think there was lobbying, they thought maybe 25%, 50%, but it's gone to 100%. Whether everybody needs a charger in each individual bay, I have a slight difference of opinion, but the provisions are there now for the build, the new build.
I think, I mean, at the end of the day, what about the load management for that building, for each building? Would you have to get experts to just work out? Because let me tell you, in South Africa, just last year, we had 282, I think it was, load shedding incidents.
Yes.
On a daily basis. I mean, you're not, I don't think, in that position, but certainly we've got to watch the electricity side of things.
Yeah, for sure. So that's for for new builds. So they can handle that a little bit better. But for retrofitting existing buildings, especially, load management is a much bigger issue. So older buildings particularly may not have metered circuit boards, right? They may not have the ability to put EV chargers in every single individual bay. But what they may be able to do to monitor load management as well is, if they've got visitor bays, to allocate a certain number of bays where they could install chargers, and that people have the ability to use them in a shared communal environment, just like you use a shared swimming pool or a shared barbecue area. And you have a booking system that enables people to use that. I've had an electric vehicle two electric vehicles since 2017. And I would charge mine maybe twice a week overnight on a trickle charger, which is the one that goes straight to the power point. So depending on how far you drive, you don't necessarily need to have a full tank of petrol all the time. I mean, who carries a full tank of petrol all the time, right? So I think there is a lot of capacity to optimize turnover and use of a smaller number of EV chargers to ensure that you don't trip that load management, because it's like everybody turning on their freezer, the television, the hot water shower, everything at the same time. You're going to have brownouts, and that's a risk, not just for a building, but a whole suburb. So I think part of the initial questions to ask for buildings in South Africa is, do a survey of the residents in the building, of existing buildings. Who's got an EV? Who's likely to get one? When are they likely to get it? And stagger out your adoption of EV charging to suit the requirements of the building. And I think that's really an important thing to do, to understand your user needs before just saying, we have to roll out, EV chargers in every single bay. People may not need it. And the CapEx may not be something that the building or its committee can absorb immediately.
And you also spoke about, and I found it quite amusing. You spoke about EV charging behavior. We know behavior is really a huge subject in sectional title. What does icing mean? Icing.
Okay. So ICE stands for internal combustion engine. So your petrol vehicles, your diesel vehicles, your typical vehicles that most people drive now. So when an electric vehicle bay is iced, it means that a non-electric vehicle, so a petrol or a diesel vehicle, parks in an EV charging bay, and then it can't be used for charging by an electric vehicle. Okay, it's twofold, because I also think about if somebody's in the spot, they've iced somebody out of parking in there. So I think, what is it? Top Gun, Iceman. Do you remember the pilot?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that. So, and there's also another phrase which is called hogging, when people who drive an electric vehicle, have finished their charging, but they leave the car sitting in the bay while they're not charging and somebody else can't use it. So again, rather than having arguments over parking in the wrong spot or overstaying your charge, have a system whereby you can give people authority and times that are allocated to ensure fair charging and optimal turnover. The other thing that it means for the building is there's a whole lot of different models that you can work out as to who pays. And if you have a system where there's a couple of charges and the building's able to get wholesale electricity at certain prices, it might be able to put a margin on the cost per kilowatt hour that it charges residents to charge. So there might be an opportunity to make a little bit of money to put back towards communal expenses. Or if there are other people outside the building that want to charge, if your bylaws allow it, that they may allow third parties to come in and access those resources, and again, make money on the charge as a differential there, as a margin. There's a whole lot of different things you can look at.
Interesting, yeah. I think this opens up a whole new world of work for lawyers, I think. But at the end of the day, I'm anxious about charging things. And, knowing me, I think my car, I'd go out to go to an important meeting and the battery would be dead and all sorts of things. So it does induce a lot of anxiety. And you do say that, people do charge at home because they like to know that, you're at home and you're charging. So I think what you say about the communal sharing is definitely would be beneficial ultimately. So I've also heard companies like Tesla apparently are putting out charging or, these places where you can charge, but just for Tesla vehicles. Are you seeing that kind of thing in Australia where a certain make of vehicle is putting up?
Okay. So Tesla has rolled out superchargers globally that were designated initially for Tesla-only vehicles. But what's happening now is the plug types are being consolidated effectively. And Tesla has started in the US to open up their chargers, their superchargers particularly, to other vehicle type 2 charging plugs. So I think that will happen more. Tesla has been quite a closed environment, but I think that they are starting, definitely in the US, to open up their chargers to other vehicles. So it's not exclusively Tesla. So that's a really good thing. Range anxiety is something that you touched on. You used the word anxiety. One of the other terms that's used in the electric vehicle market is called range anxiety. And it's like you said, when you go somewhere and you don't have enough charge for your vehicle. And I think that we've overcome that a lot more in Australia. When I bought my first Tesla in Australia in 2017, there weren't a lot of charging stations, but I wasn't going long distances, so I didn't worry about it too much. And you can plan out your trip. But in Australia now, as a lot more EV charging companies have installed chargers and the government has put out a lot of incentive plans, range anxiety is becoming less of a significant barrier to EV adoption. So that backbone and infrastructure has evolved quite a lot. I think as of last year, we had 3,000 public chargers. So there's quite a few more now. This year, there'll probably be about the 4,000. And then there's also private chargers. But range anxiety is a term used when you don't think you'll have enough juice in the battery to get you to your next destination. So it's very real.
For sure. And if we're talking about assistance and incentives to get these kind of things going, what is the government in Australia doing to assist
Okay.
strata, schemes.
So the Australian government's been really very proactive about this. They have done a number of different grant incentive programs at different levels. So there's been federal government grants through an agency called ARENA. There's been for development of a backbone for public EV charging. There are associations like the motorist associations, like NRMA, for example, that they are rolling out public chargers. On a state-by-state basis, though, the governments have now realised that, especially in apartment buildings, where EV charging does need to take place and you need a little bit more CapEx to modify the infrastructure, that there is assistance being provided there. So in New South Wales, so I'm in Sydney, and in our state in New South Wales, the New South Wales government has opened up a government grant program for $10 million to assist strata buildings to pay for up to $80,000 of CapEx on their building to assist with reports, analysis, and implementation and installation of both hardware and ongoing software for maybe, I think it's a year or two. So we've got some details around that, which is really great. And buildings are taking that offer up.
That's almost unheard of here. We do have a green paper. So for the managing agents listening out there, there is a green paper. It's called the Auto Green Paper here in South Africa, Angelique. And it was launched in 2021. There is a government gazette number for anybody who is interested. And if I can just read from the Auto Green Paper so that you know where the government is going. It says the future of the automotive industry in South Africa lies in large-scale vehicle production and component exports. Exporting remains key to achieving international competitiveness. If South Africa does not want to lose its major export markets and face significant job losses, as well as a substantial drop in the automotive industry's contribution to the GDP, which currently stands at 4.9%, it must accelerate its electric vehicle transformation in the country. So I think the intention is there. Whether the wherewithal is there, I'm not too sure, but hopefully we're going to go in the right direction. Interestingly enough, Angelique, we're also talking about, we've got large manganese deposits in South Africa as well as in Africa. And that's where they're talking about South Africa being involved in the manufacturing of batteries.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and I think that's also the direction that they're going into.
While you've just touched on batteries, Marina, I'm going to bring up one of the concerns that came. So there's two things I just want to mention before I forget. In terms of large-scale adoption, the government here in Australia has also given quite a lot of incentives for fleets to transition to electric vehicles. So fleets are effectively the low-hanging fruit. So if there are companies with large vehicle fleets or government fleets, giving incentives to those captures a lot of transferring a large number of vehicles over to electric. The other thing on batteries that comes up that has been a bit of scaremongering in Australia, but also globally, but I'll bring it up because it's actually not an issue because there's misinformation out there, is, and it's related to batteries. So there have been situations, obviously, where vehicles catch fire. There's accidents or things explode, whether they're petrol vehicles or diesel vehicles, it doesn't matter. And now with electric vehicles. So the global statistics on how many electric vehicles have caught fire since 2010 is like 456, which is not a very large number at all. But there's been a lot of scaremongering in the press saying, oh, electric vehicles catch fire, they're terrible, our whole building's going to go down in flames. But in fact, it is about 1/100th of the frequency that petrol and diesel vehicles catch fire. So it's a way, way smaller phenomenon. The thing is, with a lithium battery that's in an electric vehicle, they do tend to have a longer burn time, and that's known as thermal runaway. So it's a little bit, takes longer for them to put out. So it's not as easy to put them out by a first responder. But we have an excellent resource here that's been government funded, and they have done all the analysis and data over electric vehicle fires globally, and the results and the statistics. And it's actually, it's something that's been used by fire engineers in Australia to try and create a little bit more anxiety around it. So I guess they hire fire engineers more. but the data tells a very different story. So I would really, if that comes up as an objection to people adopting electric vehicles, I highly recommend them to look at the data, and we can send you the links to the Australian data that we've got. Well, it touches all the global, but Emma Sutcliffe at EV FireSafe has done a phenomenal job with this, and she's actually a first responder herself. She's a fire responder herself.
Great, that's great. Resources are good going forward, and yeah, I look forward to some more interesting conversations with you as well. Let's talk about reducing the carbon footprint as well. I think that's on the upside. It's one of your pros in one of your articles.
Yes, it is. So reducing the carbon footprint with basically just having your electric vehicles, less emissions. But we also look at it from my personal perspective with parking by reducing the amount of time we call cruising, which is circling, looking for parking. So if you have somewhere that you know is physically reserved for you that you can go and park in, then you know that spot is there for you, so you can go directly there. Cruising and searching for parking causes traffic congestion, which can increase carbon emissions by up to 30%. And there's been studies done in the US by this. There's a seminal paper by Donald Shoup back in Berkeley. And so circling around looking for parking not only causes congestions, but a lot of pollution. So if you combine that with certainty of knowing where you're going, reduce the amount of time you're on the road, and then you combine that with an electric vehicle, you've got a huge amount of benefit there in terms of reducing CO2 and sustainability. So it's a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
And measurable.
Yeah, and what you can measure, you can manage. And it's all about
That's
management, actually managing a whole network and a whole system.
And it is about changing behaviors, like you mentioned before. People are a little bit uncertain about new things. But we've noticed here, I mean, when I first started working around EVs, the tone of people, I speak to a lot of people in sectional buildings. My parents are older, and, there's a lot of older people that reduce from, a home, that downsize. But they're getting their heads around it really, really quickly. And they know it's just part of the way the life is moving. So I think having those information sessions and having small community groups around it. We have the Rotary Association here. I don't know if you have a similar association.
We do have a few groups like that.
Yeah. And they've started giving community talks at like local community centres for buildings, and they explain the process. So it's really good to have the information and to drip feed it out slowly, I think, but with good data.
Very much. You'd still be laughing at us in South Africa, because every time an electric car goes past nowadays, we all go, gosh, it's so silent, you can't hear it, and we all stop talking, and it goes past, and it's like a panther vehicle. It's so, so we're still excited about that here. Although there are people, I mean, I'm over exaggerating. There are definitely a lot of people driving electric vehicles, but yeah, we still get excited.
Well, they'll be autonomous in South Africa before you know it. They're autonomous in San Francisco. They're still testing them. Not rolled out yet. And then, of course, the flying vehicles as well, the flying taxis, which will be rolling out in Dubai very soon. So it's all very exciting.
Oh, tell us about that. What is a flying taxi?
Flying taxi. So it's a vertical takeoff and landing. So it looks a little bit like an oversized drone, but they take off vertically, and then they move like a plane, and then they come back. So it is like an oversized drone. So they will be and I think we're looking at them for the Brisbane Olympics in 2030. They're talking about bringing them here as well. They're called EVTOLs, and they're also electric. So again, reducing carbon footprint, which is amazing.
I would love one of those. I really would. Can you imagine?
It's the Jetsons from the 50s, from the 60s, the Jetsons. I put the Jetsons. I love the Jetsons.
Exactly.
It's real.
Same. Wow, that's amazing. What about, we talk a lot in South Africa about property values, because also with COVID, we've seen the devaluation of our properties. Interest rates have gone up. Hopefully towards the end of this year, interest rates are going to start dropping here in South Africa. But resale, I mean, if you don't have these charges in your building, I mean, do you foresee it as an issue from an asset value?
Absolutely. And there's been studies done here with one of the large real estate real estate companies, domain.com.au. I don't know if you have them in South Africa as well, but they've looked at properties which do have electric vehicle charging and others that don't. And the difference in capital is comparing at about 12%. which is a really significant amount. So whether it's for tenants or it's for yourself, if you can't charge your vehicle at home, you're not going to look at that building. And we actually, there's one company here that has now started to identify which buildings do have EV charging in them and which don't, so that when people are looking through the real estate ads to see what properties to inspect, it's now an item listed in a number of them, especially for the apartments, EV charging capacity.
Gosh, and it just moves, things just move on. Then first it was, does it have space for a dishwasher? Then it's Wi-Fi. Has it got, it's got Wi-Fi. You ask all these questions. As an owner, you've got to be on top of things.
It's just becoming another feature. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I wonder, we've spoke about load management concerns and the sort of the downside as well of electric vehicles and the chargers. But as you know, as a lawyer, and I've dealt with quite a few of the lawyers there in Australia and New South Wales, and also all these processes in your strata buildings where you've got to get committees to agree to this and to agree to that. What are the processes? I mean, briefly speaking,
so,
if you want to...
Given that I'm a lawyer, but what will generally happen, there'll be committee meetings, and what we're seeing happening now is that a lot of the buildings are adopting bylaws, a standard type of bylaw to require EV charging or to allow people to put EV charging in. The thing is, if you don't have a standardized process, you get people just putting a charger in. They may then cut through a ceiling to get the cable up to their apartment because that's where their metered circuit board is, But by doing so, they may have broken a fire seal that you don't know about, for example. You don't know who's putting the power in for them. If you should centralize it and have a system and a process and have qualified installers, electricians doing it for you, and have a pre-approved sequence. So we're also seeing a lot of that happening now, so that it's not that the building can deny you the ability to put in a charger. It just means have a system, have a process, and think it out first so that it becomes easy for subsequent people if they want to add it on. And I think also with the national construction rules that require every parking space to be fitted, potentially with not fitted with a charger, but be provisioned for a charger. I think if a building prevented you from doing so and you took it to court, my gut feeling would be that, like a pet, they couldn't prevent you from, you'd lose if you tried to stop someone from installing, unless there was a massive reason for it. I think it would be unlikely that they'd be able to stop you from wanting to put it in. That's my gut feel, but I'm not a lawyer, so that's not advice. But yeah, it's becoming much more common. I think in New South Wales now, it's close to 10% of all new vehicles are EV charge. Canberra, the ACT, the Capital Territory, is way ahead of us. It's probably about 20%, 25% of all vehicles are now EVs. So it's moving quite quickly.
Well, for the managing agents listening as well, when Angelique refers to bylaws, in South Africa, we're talking about rules. So management rules and conduct rules. And I would expect that in our law, it would be a reasonably necessary improvement. So it's certainly not like a luxury to put this in. And for that, you would need a 75% resolution from your body corporate, from the owners to put that in. But again, my view is the same as yours. If, for example, you didn't get 75% in the bylaw, I think you would have had national legislation which would start overriding the decisions taken by the sectional title complex. We also have an ombud here, Angelique, called the Community Schemes Ombud Service. And they send out directives. And I think one of those directives might also include that you have to allow for that. Otherwise, the ombud might be able to override the special resolution taken. So all very interesting. What about maintenance?
I'm curious about the general tenor about EV adoption. Are people excited? Are they welcoming EVs in South Africa, or is it they're still quite nervous and scared about it, unsure?
I think like me, I keep asking, where are these chargers? Where are they? I can't see enough of them. And I think from an infrastructure point of view, we are concerned. From an electricity load management point of view, I think we're concerned. So until we start seeing those kind of things improving, you know, we should be more excited. I think it's absolutely an amazing process taking place. So yeah, hopefully, with all the will in the world, you can only do so much if your infrastructure and that kind of thing is not in place.
It is true.
Yeah.
We're finding now that oil and gas companies are also transitioning a lot of their petrol stations. Not only transitioning, but they're adding a lot of EV chargers. So, for example, Ampol is doing a lot here, and they're working with property asset owners, for example, to put charging stations in at the front of shopping centres, for example. So it becomes it changes the pattern of behaviour. We're working with shopping centres or putting them in, but they don't want necessarily the super fast chargers because they want people to linger at the shopping centre. So each use case is slightly different. So they'll put in a different charger. For example, there's things like on-screen advertising. Ampol, where they're doing it, they've chosen selected areas, and they want to make it almost like a nice hub area, not like where you can get a coffee, do a little bit of shopping. And so the nature of the place, which is the e-mobility hub, will become quite different to what just a petrol station is today. It's not just drop in, drop out, because you've got to wait. At the moment, the chargers are plug in. And the other exciting part that we haven't touched on for the buildings is will become V2G in the future. So not only will you be able to take power from the building to charge your vehicle, but that vehicle will become a mobile battery. So at different points and in response to load management, that vehicle will then be able to put power back into the building or into the grid. So it's bidirectional. Those vehicles are just in pilot. There's 2 globally, I think, at the moment. So they're early stage, and the charges that will be associated with those are a bit different to the ones that are currently in the market. But vehicle to grid will help sectional buildings because it will be able to lower their costs of energy. And so when you combine it with solar, you think about all the solar panels on the top, you won't be needing to draw so much power from the grid. You'll become much more self-sustaining, and that will help reduce, hopefully, strata levies at the end of the day on operational costs.
Gosh, sounds like you guys have got it together. Definitely got it together. So
we're working on it. There's a lot of sun. There's a lot of sun here, and there's a lot of sun in South Africa too.
Exactly. Thank goodness there is. So if we're talking about when we first started speaking, I was so excited to hear you say that you're taking a lot of these parking initiatives and your business particularly around the world. And you mentioned that women are at the forefront of being interested in implementation of your systems worldwide. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. Oh, look, parking, as we all know, parking's for where I fell into, and like property or strata, there's a lot of male-dominated industries, and I think they've all done a great job. But we're thinking a little bit outside the box and thinking from the customer perspective has become much more prevalent now, rather than, if I give the parking example, if you look at a boom gate, people thought, oh, well, the boom gate will shut people in. But now if you think about the customer journey from the driver's experience, right? What does that look like to the driver? They want a smooth and seamless experience. They don't want to have to pull out a ticket from a dirty machine. They just want to be able to, and then pull it out and put it into another ticket machine at the end, and then put coins into the machine. If you can make that frictionless and seamless, that user experience is enhanced in a different way from a parking perspective. And to do that, you use technology. And I think having that intuitive experience is probably a slightly more feminine quality, to be honest. There's a really interesting digital minister of Taiwan, and her name's Audrey Tang. And in Taiwan, 70% of the software engineers are actually women, not men. And they're not called engineers. I think they're called designers. And they look at, rather than the Internet of Things, they look at it as the Internet of Beings. I've got a great quote of hers. I'm just going to see if I can pop it up on my screen because I'd like to read it to you. And it just looks at things from a different perspective. So rather than machines guiding us, we use the machines to implement our human qualities. So I'm going to digress here for a moment,
Yeah, go for
Marina,
it.
but I really love this. I love what Audrey. So she's the digital minister of Taiwan. She created the job for herself. It didn't really exist. But this is what she wrote as part of her poem to Parliament when she first arrived, her job description. When we see the Internet of Things, let's make it an Internet of Beings. When we see virtual reality, let's make it a shared reality. When we see machine learning, let's make it collaborative learning. When we see user experience, let's make it about human experience. When we hear the singularity is near, let us remember the plurality is here. And for me, that just really explains and distills the human element of all this technology and stuff around us. At the end of the day, we're human beings and we should drive the experience that the technology enables us to share. So, sorry, that was a complete digression.
That's beautiful.
But
thank you. I couldn't agree more. And I think it's a bit of a scary world because things are moving so fast and at such a rapid pace. I think to finish off, Angelique, let's look at practically now. If we've got a sectional title building here in Johannesburg, your practical advice, the tips that we need to follow. I know we're talking about, gain knowledge, all those types of things. Just walk us through
electric vehicle.
Yeah.
Okay. So there'd be a few things I'd do first is, first of all, I would sit down and survey your residents first. What do they want? What do they need? Who's interested in getting electric vehicles? Who's not? And what are they doing about it? Then from that, you would, and I don't know how you do it in South Africa, but in Australia, there are consultants that will come out and help you assess your building. But you do need to have that information about what demand you have for electric vehicles, because anybody's going to try and upsell you to the moon and back, right? So they'll come in, they'll look at your existing circuit boards, they look at your capacity, they look at load management. And load management, we didn't touch on it, but it can also be managed by software overlays on the EV chargers. And a lot of the physical chargers have software integrations into them or already inbuilt to manage load management. So if the rest of the building is using a whole heap of power because it's a really hot day with air conditioning, it will reduce the amount of power that's available to charge the electric vehicles. So you won't draw as much power for that, for example. So the second thing is I would get a consultant in and I would ask them to have a look at what the options are. It's generally easier to change and more cost effective to do things within the building envelope. So if you can make modifications to, for example, your circuit boards that's within your property, you can control that. But if you have to go outside your boundary and deal with the energy company to get more power coming in, that's going to be a far more expensive exercise. So in that situation, I would probably recommend having a smaller number of bays with electric vehicle charging and to have a sharing mechanism or a booking system with it, which is what we do. Then beyond that, you go out and get your tenders for different types of chargers, get somebody to look over the proposals. Installation is not the hard part. There's a bit of education around teaching people how to use it, how to use them, and whether you have a booking system or a sharing system or not. And then just ongoing maintenance to ensure that you have a maintenance contract. And the other critical part is having the building decide how payment is going to be allocated. So if it's going to be a shared cost that goes to overheads to your levies, or whether it's a user pays system. So there are different software solutions that you can do to implement according to what business rules, I guess, the building wants to decide on. Right. And sort of, I've actually got a document which I can share with you, which has got a good life cycle type, some 6 steps on what to do about big steps, big picture steps on procurement, on the procurement journey.
We'd appreciate that, Angelique. Your insights have been invaluable. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to you. I've got to go do some research on those flying taxis. But thank you so much. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to have you on board from so far across the sea. And I'm glad that our time zones have managed to meet. And I look forward to speaking to you again at some stage. Thank you. Well, there you have it. I hope that we've provided you all with some food for thought. As I said, we're a little bit behind. Hopefully we'll catch up and our electricity problems will become a thing of the past in future. But I really enjoy looking outwards, because sometimes you feel like you're working so hard within your own little space. And it's lovely to get an idea from people, in other countries about what's going on. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you to our sponsors again for always being there to provide solutions. Please go to the videos page as well to view a couple of interviews with our sponsors, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you and goodbye.